All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our June Bicep Community Call 2022. As you know, here's our team. It is growing slowly, but surely. We have awesome team members and more will be joining. As always, we really appreciate our core maintainers. They do so much for us. They're always so supportive and helping us out. And I'm very excited to introduce our interns. You guys met Sydney Creamy last month. She had given a brief explanation on the intern project this summer, and she's going to talk a little bit more, but I'd love to introduce Kathy and Mohammed. Kathy, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Kathy. I go to UW-Madison, my hometown New Jersey. I'm a rising senior, and I'm super excited to be working on Bicep this summer.
Thanks, Kathy.
Hey, shout out for New Jersey. Which part? I used to live there.
I'm from Central Jersey, so I actually live in Princeton.
Oh, okay.
All right, and Mohammed, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hello everyone, my name is Mohammed. I go to University of Houston and I'm a rising senior. And originally I'm from Pakistan, and yeah, I'm excited to work on this project and add great value to it.
Thanks, Mohammed. Thanks, Kathy. We're so excited. They've been doing an amazing job so far, and we're only halfway through. So they're going to give a demo sometime in this call, and we'll see what they're up to. Again, a community call is for you guys. Be active in the Q&A at the end and get updates on topics that we might not cover in regular calls and content. This is a great way for you guys to just talk to us directly. Yeah, please use the chat, raise your hands if you have anything you want to say, and you can unmute yourself, turn on your camera, all of that. All right, Alex.
Okay, so it's funny because we didn't really have much time to get this release out because 0.7 took us a little longer than expected, but it turns out we actually got a lot done in 0.8. So this should be out. We're shooting to get it out tomorrow. If not, it'll be next week. So the first one is the bicep deploy command. This has been in at least the 0.7 release, possibly 0.6 as well. Basically, you can right click on a file or use the command bar and search for deploy, and it'll run you through like a guided wizard for deploying your template, all within VS Code. So it's just another convenient way of deploying. We've been kind of like experimenting with it and tweaking the functionality, and there have been some bugs reported, which has been super helpful. So we now feel good enough to turn it on by default. So please give that a whirl if it's something that seems interesting to you. We're definitely still looking for feedback on that experience. The second one, add support for read-only resource types. I think actually I saw Stan file an issue about this morning or overnight. So this actually just got fixed. If you needed to get an existing reference to something like a built-in policy, you couldn't do that. Basically, Bicep only understood the resources that you can create or update. It didn't understand this concept of read-only resource types, which there aren't that many of, but they mostly exist at tenant scope. You can't create your own policy definition at tenant scope, so Bicep just didn't understand what it was. So now we do, so that'll be a nice addition. We now have file completions and go to definition support for the load content functions. So when you start typing load JSON content or whatever you're using, you'll now get completions basically on what we see in the file system. And then you'll also be able to right click and go to definition or command click, whatever operating system you're on. So that'll take you right to the relevant file. We've supported this for Bicep modules, kind of the same workflows, but we hadn't supported it for the load content function. So this is another nice quality of life addition. Number 4, improve validation and completions for top level resource properties. This one's a little nuanced, but basically we didn't have as accurate of a definition of some of these top level properties as we should have. So you would get kind of funny completions for the properties like identity, and there are others. So we've kind of patched that up. There was a bug on when you tried to use, I think, particularly ternary expressions on the parent property. We fixed that bug. A couple people were running into it. We now have a join function. So if you want to join several elements of an array together into a single string and kind of collapse it down, we now have that function. This is part of most standard libraries. So this is just kind of a completion type thing. We added the force command to AZ bicep restore. So we introduced the force command in a previous release, but only in the bicep CLI. So this is just about completing that coverage in the AZ bicep implementation of the CLI. And we've added a deprecation notice for the providers function. This function tends to only get people in trouble, and people don't realize it. And so it's just, you're signing yourself up for future pain without realizing it in most cases. A lot of people use this to get a dynamic API version, which we generally suggest you avoid. So we are going to go ahead and deprecate it. We're going to put a deprecation notice, just like we have done for others. So you'll see this as like a strike through in your editor, and we'll give it some time to bake and see if anybody screams about this change. But we are going to at least try to deprecate it. I see some questions. I believe join has to be an array, Alex. And I don't think it has to be static values for the array. I think it can come from anywhere. We introduced the join function to the ARM deployments runtime, so it should just work kind of as expected.
Yeah, just to confirm, the array parameter, all of the elements get converted into strings, and then you join them based on the separator. So the join element there would be like a comma, for example.
Cool. I think, Stephanie, we can go to the next one. Oh, I always forget to animate the slide or fix the animation. Okay, so obviously we're getting 0.8 out tomorrow, hopefully. For 0.9, we have a couple, I think, exciting things. One is Visual Studio support, which we've gotten a lot of asks for. It's basically taking the language service, lifting it up, and plopping it into Visual Studio. So features that kind of are special to VS Code, so things like the bicep deploy command and some of those sorts of things, those won't be ported over, at least initially. But all the kind of basics, the meat of Bicep will all be ported over to Visual Studio. There's not going to be like project support or anything like that. It's just if you have a Bicep file, it will work. We're shooting for TTK parity in the Bicep linter. Basically, we want everything you would have otherwise needed the TTK for in the Bicep linter. And so the goal is that you just shouldn't need the TTK anymore if you've ported to Bicep. The third one is something called Lambda expressions. So this is an expression that is common in a lot of programming languages now. Basically, it is what enables us to do much better list manipulation in Bicep. So a lot of you have asked for things like filter functions and other things of that nature. This is kind of our way of solving that. We're going to demo this more on the next community call and kind of walk through all the different scenarios, because especially if you're not familiar with lambdas at all, this is kind of like something that you need to take some time on to really learn. But it's going to open the door to just a lot better list manipulation. So there's all sorts of places where you need to filter things down and conditionally check for things in lists or reorder them or whatever. So you'll be able to do all of that with Lambda. We actually finished it, but we still have to finish the runtime changes. For 0.10, we do think we'll have the Kubernetes provider out by then. So we are excited to see what you all do with that, if anything. So we're we think we're delivering a pretty good experience, but we're going to see kind of how it plays and see what people do with it. We're making Bicep decompile kind of a theme of O.10 and improving the workflows around that. So as an example, one of the issues they're looking at is like something called paste as Bicep. So if you copied like a big JSON blob and you need to do the like kind of uncomfortable conversion to Bicep and get all your apostrophe or your commas right and everything, we're going to have like paste as Bicep. So if we see that it's JSON, we can do the conversion for you automatically, which should be another quality of life improvement. Build and decompile APIs. I think we talked about this last time. This is specifically to enable use of Bicep in the portal wherever it makes sense. So you'll be able to export as Bicep, and you'll be able to deploy Bicep code directly. And under the covers, we'll use these APIs to kind of make that all work. Otherwise, nothing else has really changed. The 1.0 list is the same. It's still TBD. We're just kind of, it'll be 1.0 when it's done. So we're just going to keep doing these monthly releases. We really like the change to this regular release cadence, and we're just going to keep chipping away at it over time. It doesn't look like there are any major questions on the roadmap. I see there's some discussion about Lambdas, but it looks like Marcin and Anthony have that covered. Bicep decompile Terraform anytime soon. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have that. I mean, it's complicated for all sorts of reasons. But with Terraform introducing the AZ API provider, which is all sourced by the Bicep types library, it'll be much easier to go from Bicep to Terraform and use AZ API to support that conversion. And in theory, if it was a Terraform file with all AZ API, we could get it back to Bicep pretty easily as well. But with AZ API being so new, that won't really come up very often. It's much harder to decompile, quote unquote, Azure RM Terraform code because it's much more like handcrafted. Okay, I think we can keep going.
All right. So I'm not sure if you guys remember, but Uche and I have been doing a Bicep docs interview, research based off of what you guys are wanting and liking and hoping for in the Bicep docs. And one of the big changes that we've been able to make is update changelog, since we noticed that of the people we interviewed, a lot have been using the reference section. So Tom, would you like to take it away? And you can share your screen.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, so just yesterday, I published changelogs for each resource provider. Now this changelog is scoped just to what you would need for a Bicep file or an ARM template. So it's basically just the create operation. So it lists resource types and properties that have changed between API versions. And let me share my screen so that we can take a look at the docs. So for each resource provider, there's a new subnode called changelog. If you look in there, there's a summary topic, which lists it's kind of the resource type view. It shows which resource types were updated or added for each version. And then for each resource type, there's kind of what I call a detailed view, which gets into the properties that have changed. So you see, for example, in this API version, these properties were added. Each property links to the section in the reference docs that describes that property. So hopefully this will be a way for you to start seeing kind of, what you should look at if you're changing the API version in your Bicep file, kind of why you might want to update a version or things that you should be concerned about with removed properties and so on. Let me show you. So this is the summary page, as I mentioned. I've presented this as what I'm calling a table view, with new resource types over here, updated resource types over here. Did also get some feedback that this is maybe hard to understand. So I presented one other layout. It's only under app configuration. It's the same summary page, but more is what I'm calling a list view, where you've got updated types and you've got new types. So at this point, these docs have only been out for a day. I'd be curious to get feedback from people. Just which summary page do you like better? The layout? Are there things within the detail pages that are helpful or not helpful? What are changes you would like to see? Certainly, if you're coming across anything where you think what's listed here is not accurate, that maybe a property was added in an earlier version and it's listed as being added later, let me know. And I am also, this is, obviously this is kind of auto-generated content. There's not a lot of context to these changes. I am also working on a separate project that's more of a full-featured changelog for Azure REST API. And that we are hopefully going to be able to get more kind of descriptions of API versions and what you might look at. So that is coming. No particular date on that at that point, but we have started working on it.
Thanks, Tom. There are some questions in the chat. Carlo, will this also be extended to resource provider features? Unfortunately, that's not in the plan. That would take a lot more work in terms of working with the actual RPs and having them update on their own, because there's so many RPs. But if that's something that people are really interested in, we could consider putting it on the list. And it looks like, yeah, please vote on which visualization is better, table layout versus inline layout. Alex put both of those options in chat.
Yeah, and I see, I'm looking through the questions right now. One thing I should have mentioned is for the properties I list added properties, removed properties. I also do list updated properties. And for updated, I only look at the enum values and whether the required flag flipped. So that is there, and I can paste an example of where you would see the enum values had changed. Let's see. I'm just looking through. Default property. At this point, we don't list anything about a default property, but I think that's something that may be a possibility. Okay, and I'll continue looking through these questions.
Yeah, thank you guys all for your feedback. If it's a good idea, we could Tom and Alex, we could talk further about putting it into GitHub issue for people to vote on. Yeah, we'll move on. Super exciting. I'd love to hand it over to Sydney, our PM intern for this year.
Hey everyone, so this summer, Kathy, Mohammed, and I are working on a project to support native Bicep parameter files. This is a feature that has been highly requested in the past. We asked for people to sign up for interviews in last month's community call and on Twitter, so big shout out to everyone who participated in those. After listening to your feedback, we would like to share our progress on this project. The goal is stated here to create parameter files in Bicep to make it easier to provide parameters for Bicep deployments. So right now I'd like to walk through some of the features we have scoped out for the summer project and the MVP, as well as briefly touching on some features we have planned for further out. So with that, let me share my screen. So if you'd like to follow along, this is on GitHub, issue number 7301. Yeah, so just to get started, the goals, like I said, was to make it easier to provide parameters for Bicep deployments, to provide a smooth user experience with IntelliSense and completion support that mirrors Bicep files, and to allow users to perform validation on parameter values before deployment to Azure. Some non-goals, so these
Sydney,
are things.
sorry for interrupting. Can you zoom in like 2 or 3 times?
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem.
So moving on to non-goals, these are things that won't be addressed by the project. First, we are not modifying any existing functionality of Bicep files, and we will not be resolving issues that come from complex objects or deployment stacks. So moving on from there, for the summer project that we have planned, these are things that we are hoping to get done. Me, Kathy, and Mohammed are planning to get done by the end of the summer. So first here we have the basic syntax. We want to be able to set parameter values using the syntax param name equals value, and then the syntax using, and then the path to select a Bicep template file to point at. And then we also want to have syntax highlighting as well as comments, objects and arrays, all the same as in Bicep files. In compilation, I can compile the Bicep parameter files into JSON to deploy with a Bicep file. And as well for the summer, we want to have code completion and navigation all built in with VS Code. So this includes being able to view parameter descriptions that are from the linked Bicep template. We can see validation with the decorators that you guys use in Bicep files. For example, if you use the add allowed decorator, you should be able to see which values you are allowed to select for a parameter value. As well as the go-to definition and find ref and symbol highlighting. So this is just an example of what we want of the syntax. Kathy and Mohammed will be going over this shortly, so I think it'll be better to see that demo. Moving past that to the MVP, so these are things that we want to have done for like a full release. Code completion and navigation, there are a few more things that we want to have done, such as like smart renaming and an outline view of all the parameters. Moving from there, new features would be string replacement expressions. So being able to use some of the expressions that you are able to use in Bicep. However, we will not be allowing non-deterministic functions. So this is like your resource group.id. However, deterministic functions such as unique string and contains, you'll be able to use to dynamically set a parameter. Another feature that was requested that we have prioritized for the MVP is environment variables. So being able to pass in environment variables as parameter and variable values. So variable values goes back to the string replacement expressions. Moving forward, we also want to be able to use the load functions, all 3 of them, and have that same dot operator completion experience. We also want to have a VS Code action to generate a Bicep parameter file based off of a Bicep template, as well as have full compatibility with the current tooling, including Azure CLI and PowerShell. And I'll look at the questions when I'm done going through this. But moving on to the future tasks. So these are things that we think will require some further investigation, but these are some ideas that we've had. So first, we have modular parameters similar to modules in Bicep templates or the Bicep files. We want to have modular parameters, which will allow you to do more to like pass values to the parameters in other files and have replacement. And we are thinking of using the import directive to be able to import these modular parameters. We're also thinking of being able to set deployment properties in parameter files. So these are the properties that you set in the command line at runtime. So instead of having to do it in the command line, we were intending to be able to set those, such as like the location, mode, name, and group inside the parameter file, which will allow you to have more so you can set those and have version control on that. finally, we were looking into being able to use get secret and key vault in these parameter files. However, like I said, this is something that we will have to explore further. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand it off to Kathy and Mohammed now to show a little demo of what we've been working on for the past few weeks.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and explain the first few parts of the project. So first, you're going to create a Bicep parameters file. And as you can see that it's detecting the Bicep param extension for the parameters file. And each parameters file, you have to use the using keyword to point it to a Bicep file because each parameters file is connected to one Bicep file. And here's an example of a Bicep file. And in this Bicep file, you can see the two parameters. So we're going to go ahead and write out these parameters in our parameters file. So yeah. And then as you can also see that it's doing all the syntax highlighting and everything for you as well. Another thing you have to notice here is the error. So we have implemented some error checking where you can tell you the at least the keyword if you type it wrong, but we hope to implement more in the future. Yeah. And yeah, so we're going to type the other parameter. And yeah, now Kathy is going to go ahead and talk about some other types.
So we've also got like highlighting support for arrays. So you can see here, this is all highlighted accordingly, and then also for objects, of course. So something like this. And then complex objects as well. So we can throw in an array here. And that kind of stuff. And then also we've got comments, single line comments, and multi-line comments. Yeah, that's all we've got for our demo so far.
Yep, and I think go ahead and ask questions.
Chris, you have your hand raised.
Well, wow, that was quick. So then when we do a Bicep build or Bicep deploy, the deploy, I'm assuming this can use directly, but is there a compile to this to make a normal parameters, a JSON-based parameter? What's the lifecycle process of this to go from here to Azure, to an ARM deployment, I guess is the best way.
Yeah, so under the hood, it definitely converted to a JSON. So you would get a JSON as well if you wanted that, but also just deploy with template as well directly.
So will there be a Bicep compile or a Bicep build command off of the parameter file?
There will be one Bicep build for parameters. Yep.
Oh, perfect. That's exactly what I'm hunting for.
Yeah, in the first release of this, just to be super clear, like you'll have to do, like in 0.1 and 0.2 of Bicep, you will have to build to the parameters JSON file and then deploy with the regular workflows. Eventually, we would like to get to a point, and I think Sydney called this out in the MVP, of being able to use the CLI, give it a Bicep file and a Bicep parameters file, and everything just works as expected.
Yeah, just like we did initially with Bicep.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. This is awesome.
Thank you.
We're all super proud of our interns so much, giving us much support, but they're doing it all by themselves, doing an amazing job.
Now, will this also be able to be generated from the main? In other words, can you right click the main and say create a Bicep parameter file like you can do now with a JSON parameter file?
Yeah, that was something that I mentioned in the MVP section.
Okay.
Yeah, just have parity with that.
Perfect.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Pinaki from Netherlands. The first line of this code, demo.bicep param, says using main.bicep. So may I ask what is the actual use of it, because when I'm passing the azcli command, I'm going to say -p, that command param file anyway, right?
Yeah, I guess I can take this question. So the intent of that is for completion purposes, in order for VS Code to know that we are looking at that main.bicep file. However, you are correct that yes, when you deploy, like it will just look at the parameters.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, technically, we could be able just to provide the parameter file to the deployment, right, and read the template from the file. Yeah, just an idea.
So what happens if you have two different templates using the same parameter file? What do you put over there?
That's a good question.
I think in what we've found in practice is having multiple bicep files for a shared parameter file is a relatively unusual scenario. We do recognize that it does happen sometimes. I think we're going to look into this import directive that Sydney mentioned as a way of like having effectively nested parameter files. So if you have something that you want to use in multiple places, you could import it and then set any parameters that weren't set in that import and so on and so forth. And that could be a way of sharing them. Did that make sense? I think it was Gregory who asked the question.
Yes.
Cool.
Whit, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I just missed something, but I guess why wouldn't I just use the parameters and their default values in my root bicep file? Why do I want a second, parameter only thing that's duplicating the parameters that I've got elsewhere?
I think it's because in some use cases, people want to be able to change the change parameters. For example, in like a dev environment versus a prod environment. So having these parameter files will allow you to make those small changes and deploy.
Okay, so I guess will the so this is setting what those default values are for those different deployment environments. Is this something that is then? I'm sorry.
Wait, I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
This is not creating new parameters. This is providing values for the parameters that were declared in main.bicep. In other words, it's the same as the JSON parameters file use cases today.
Gotcha.
Did that help clarify?
Yes.
And that's the discussion we had on the name of the keyword param versus, say, value or something.
Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. Okay.
So
that makes sense. Is there a chance of it being? Is there a chance of it being scaffolded out for you? So especially if you've got an enormous number of parameters in your root file, is there a chance of it being, have a bicep param file generated out with all of those params that you have, so that you know your starting point? Because otherwise, this seems almost duplicative to say, I've got all these values here that I'm using by default. I can use them in these other environments, but I'm just rewriting the same values over and over.
Do you all want me to take that one?
Yes, please.
I think so. We'll have it. We'll have a right click, generate parameters, generate bicep parameters command and functionality.
Right. Thanks.
Yep.
Kevin, I think your hand is up.
Sure, thanks. So just a quick question. So with calling in the main bicep with that using statement, will that also go to any nested modules that you have in your main template to be able to do parameters there and do validation of those parameters that may be inside other nested modules?
Yeah, so that, like I mentioned, that is something that we really have to explore to make that experience like really good. Cool. I would hope so, because the whole point of this project is to allow this validation to be done prior to deployment. So that is definitely something we will keep in mind as we scope that out.
Okay, excellent. And then just a quick second question, just based on that sort of using statement. Have you investigated all, or do you plan to just trying to like maybe using that using statement in the main bicep file and pointing to your parameter file as like an alternative? I don't know how the logic works behind how it's pulling them, but I don't know if that would be an easier way to say this main file is using a different parameter file.
Yeah, so that is something we thought about. And we put it in the parameter file because we see that the more common use case is having multiple parameter files to one template file. So that's why we did that.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Excellent. This is good stuff.
Thank you. And then Alex.
Alex Chrome, right?
Yes.
Sorry, I was on mute and talking away. Yes, this looks fantastic. Thank you very much. Will there be abilities to either use multiple bicep params or some kind of inheritance? So, for example, there may be some parameters I want to use for all of my environments, and I want that in a common param file, but then I have things that I want to differ per environment that will either be different parameters, or maybe in some case they may override one of the parameters from the common file.
Yes. So in the issue, in the future, we do plan to have these sort of modular parameters, which will cover that kind of hierarchy that you're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Sydney, do you want to? Oh,
just one more follow up real fast. Would I be able to have multiple files, multiple parameter files? So even if there's no inheritance between them, just be able to say, especially for large deployments, that huge number of parameters over here for some provider, huge number of parameters for another provider, and Bicep automatically be able to pick those up to produce one parameter file.
I think in general we've kind of avoided a little that kind of I mean, I guess you could literally provide, if you're pointing, sorry, let me start over. We want there to be some like explicit mechanism where you're saying, I want all these parameter files. So maybe through the CLI, we could allow you to pass multiple parameter files, but really we want to validate that all in Bicep first. So we would need some way of expressing it. But I think my gut would be that the importing directive that Sydney was talking about would be what we would at least recommend you do to start. And if everyone's doing that and it seems like we can optimize that, maybe we would kind of improve upon that.
I guess the use case I'm thinking of would be if I have a set of parameters that I just normally just deploy the whole thing with, but I also have separate machine generated parameters for, say, application deployments, those applications being deployed through ARM templates as well. And that those would change over time based on what current applications are. And having the ability to generate those and create this and then kick off a deployment would be very useful.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I would, if this came to me in an email and this feature just came out, I would say in the generated file, if you can include that import to import the standard like static values and see how far that gets you. And if that is uncomfortable or something like that, then I would, I think it might make sense to explore other options. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll look forward to that.
Cool.
Chris, Lewis?
Yeah, so I think that, with discussion and some of this discussion about inherited policies or parameter files gets into how Terraform works, and for that matter, Ansible, where you can specify 2 parameter files, basically TFR's file on your command line, and it concatenates those 2 into a single TFR's file that is then applied to your templates. What this allows you to do is say, I'm going to have my environment parameters at a certain level. I'm going to have my location stuff at a certain level. So when we're doing like a landing zone deploy, I deploy certain things, production level stuff to US Central. And then I also do production to US East 2, which is the mirrored region. So the concept of building up this for a given deploy is very fundamental in the larger deploy of objects in Azure, as opposed to, hey, I'm deploying a resource. So I think that that's part of the discussion is, and I think I mentioned this before, there's a really cool product in the Terraform world called TerraGrunt that does a lot of this chaining of parameter files and HCL files together to create something. I don't think it's necessarily applicable in what we're thinking of Bicep to this point right now, but as we start to talk about the entire infrastructure as code thing, where I want all of this laid out, this inherited parameter file stuff is really important and really makes our configurations easier. You know, so I'm deploying to the West US region. I want a single parameter file that says my location is West US that's set at my folder level that says West US. Below that, I might deploy a resource group. And if I just say resource group name and location, that location is inherited from the folder above. And that's, again, a much more complex and, you know, world than what we're talking about in Bicep templates. But it's certainly in the back of everyone's head and should be, as you're thinking about this, of how people actually use Bicep templates to deploy what we call stacks, you know, or, you know, for lack of a better term, your deployment stack stuff that you've worked on, Alex. It's that same concept of a whole series of templates that get thrown together, all with the same location. Well, why do I have to put in every parameter file location is West, location is West, location is West, when I could put that in a single file and inherit it down?
I'm with you. I think the takeaway for me from this conversation is that there are many scenarios where you'll have multiple parameters files effectively, and you want to intelligently piece them together such that it appears to Bicep as one and can be validated accordingly. I think we're loud and clear on that. I think I'm just a little cautious of like what is the right way to do it, and so this is it's a great intern project because it gives us a little bit of flexibility and air cover to experiment for a while.
And it might be something that's not implemented in Bicep per se.
Sure.
It could be implemented in some sort of processor that says, or even in the deployment pipelines, where we say
we want it to happen at the Bicep layer because we want to validate it all for you.
Yeah.
So the sooner we can know about the kind of final form, the better. Did that make sense?
I guess I agree, but you know, again, it's going to be really hard to implement.
Have faith. I think we can do.
Oh, I always do. You guys are awesome.
So Alex, quick question on that. Would that mean that we want to validate if we, for example, pass the what if switch on the AZCLI?
This is more validation of the static files as we understand them. So all the kind of error validation, red squigglies and yellow squigglies that you get in Bicep, we want to extend that to this parameters file and what we understand when you piece the two together, because we can validate much more richly and deeply once we know the actual values of everything.
Good.
But this is still pre what if, Pinaki.
Okay, good.
Just to clarify, when you're talking about sort of validating, you're talking things like, say, you've got a string parameter for location, but you haven't set an allowed list of the locations. Then the params file could realize, hey, this is a location. You've put Southeast Antarctica. We don't have that region. That's not going to work and blow up there before deploying. Is that the kinds of things you're talking about?
It's anything. Think of if you took that parameter value and actually just copied and pasting it to where you use that parameter file in the Bicep file, as if you hard coded it. So if you get the SKU wrong and that SKU doesn't exist, we'll know about it if we can validate your actual parameter values.
And more than that, like the completions you would get for when setting that parameter value will also take allowed values into consideration. So you'd only get completions for the ones that are valid in that case, for that location parameter in your example.
Yeah, that sounds great. Because definitely one of the challenges I've had when you've got several layers of template deep. I normally give up flowing the allowed values all the way from the templates, but this would capture all of that without having to do that. So that sounds great.
And the other thing to mention is we have some work planned to allow you to declare more like kind of like deeper type information when you're declaring parameters. So for example, rather than just saying this is an object, you could say this is an object with these keys expected, and these keys should be of these type of value types and things like that. And I think validation there is going to get even better once we have that feature in place.
I guess this would even go further to say if a parameter itself is required, I pass in a parameter, it can eventually track down that I never actually set a value to that parameter.
Yeah, in the parameters file, Whit, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if I just leave it undefined in main, and the expectation is that it comes in one of these parameter files, it'd be able to validate and say, that's still a required parameter.
Yeah, the second that you type line 1 using main.bicep, you'll probably get a red squiggly in most cases because you'll have missing parameters.
Right.
So you'll fill those out and then the file will validate, but you'll still have IntelliSense for your optional values.
Great.
All right, let's move on from questions for now. If you have any other questions or feedback, please put them in the issue itself. And I know, Sydney, you have some open questions.
I think they got covered during this discussion, so
Perfect.
feel free to move on.
Sounds good. Very cool. Alex, on to you.
Yeah. Are you able to open this, Stephanie, on your screen, or should I present it?
I can open it on my screen. I'd be getting out of the PowerPoint anyway.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Basically, I'm sure most of you have seen this linter warning before. So if you hard code the location or you use the resource group.location expression for your resource locations directly, we throw a warning and we say, hey, the best practice is actually to have location be a parameter and for ease of use to set its default value to the resource group location. Which if you're building kind of like mature templates that are expected to be reused and so on and so forth is in most cases the right thing to do. But it is a relatively strict rule. It's probably the strictest rule that catches people by surprise today. So the proposal is to disable it by default to still have the rule, but you would have to set in bicep config that you want this rule. So basically, if you're interested in this one and you do agree that this should not be a default rule, you can either go to the issue and upvote it, or you can just express here that you would like it to be defaulted to off, and we will kind of take that feedback accordingly. Actually, let me put two things in. Default loc rule off. Default loc rule on. So if you could just react to that with emojis, that would be very helpful. And if you have any particular thoughts that you don't feel have been expressed in this issue, please feel free to share that now.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah.
I just added to the chat. I did a little bit of quick telemetry work to see which rules are actually being modified. It was real quick. I assume these are the ones that are being turned off. I haven't actually verified that, but I threw those in chat as just an FYI on this. It's not the top of the list, but anyway, just.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting, I guess, if people can look at the screenshot. I'm surprised that it's not the top, to be honest. And so I'm curious, like, do other people, Are there any other rules here in particular that people feel should be defaulted off? And this can happen offline. You guys all have the screenshot in the chat. Cool. And it seems there's a lot of support for defaulting on. So continue keeping it as is essentially what that is describing. Cool. I'll let the discussion.
There's one possible compromise is because this may be demoted to info rather than a warning by default.
Oh, move it to an info status instead of warning. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't, I don't think we've used info anywhere unless anybody else knows. So that might be
one downside there is that info doesn't break the build.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that's preferable.
You can always, bump it, right?
Yeah, I've mentioned it in the issue, but one issue I've faced a lot of this, I've been introducing a lot of new developers, and with that rule, it forces you to introduce variables very early, or start teaching new developers to ignore all compiler warnings, which is not so good. So yeah, if it was to info, it wouldn't scare people so much.
Now, to add to this, we had planned on adding some more auto fix type of support to make this one easier. If that would change your mind on this, then yeah, please add that to the bug as well. Like right now, when you add a snippet, they all have that location there, and if you haven't defined the location as a parameter yet, you'll get an error. So, yep, any input is appreciated. Thanks.
I just want to add to this discussion that if we have some rule that is off by default, we will not know of its existence, basically, right? So it's better to show it than, okay, you have some rule, and then you can decide in the Bicep config whether you want to like promote it to a warning, to show it in the compiler output, or just only show it in the VS Code with info, or like stop the build with an error. So, for example, I have with some more common used modules that there should be no unused variables or so other rules that are basically errors that I'm just preventing builds to happen and stopping the PRs to be submitted. And in some normal cases, or it doesn't have to be like that, right? So I might want to keep some variable in the Bicep file for like because I want to use it in a few time, but I don't want to use it right now.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good feedback and discussion happening on this, and I think it's more divisive than I was expecting it to be. So we will read through these offline and listen back to all this and keep everyone updated on what we want to do here.
All right, we only have 6 more minutes, so let's move on to the next topic. I think it is another feedback topic. Let me get back to it. Support for template, metadata, and Bicep.
Yeah, so Simon, who I believe is here on the call, put together this proposal. We don't support setting metadata directly in Bicep, which is something that you could do in the ARM template JSON. I think there's a variety of scenarios where people were using that. So this is a proposal to add it. There's a PR to go with it. We are looking for more feedback, and we're still kind of continuing discussions on what is the right way to implement this. But if you can go to this link, which I'll put in the chat if someone doesn't beat me, is kind of what sorts of metadata would you be expecting to add? We're trying to see if there's common patterns such that we could or should like restrict the type of metadata that you're allowed to add? And what does your end-to-end workflow with metadata look like? So how are you setting it? Are you programmatically setting it? Would you need parameters to set the metadata? And how are you consuming them? So once the metadata is in the generated JSON file, or if you can parse the Bicep file yourself, what are you doing with that metadata information? Where does it show up? How does it get consumed? So if you have some time and you care about this one, please do share your thoughts.
Cool. Do you want to go through each of these questions, Alex?
I don't think I've seen questions on metadata just yet. I think we can do this one offline and ask people to fill it out.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Last month, I briefly touched on this. Sign up for Bicep feedback interviews. We love to hear from the community. If you have signed up, I haven't reached out yet. I will be doing so in the next 2 weeks. But a good amount of people signed up, and we're trying to get as much of a variety of different types of experience and companies. But please, we would love to schedule some time to talk to you. You'll be able to directly talk to our team as well. Yeah, let me put this link in chat, or if someone else can actually put that link in chat, that'd be great. Okay, with the last few minutes, we have requested Bicep updates from the issue. Alex, do you want to answer each of these?
Yep. And just another note on the research that Stephanie is driving. That is like pretty all-encompassing. I think we're getting to some later stages of some bigger chunks of work with Bicep and with deployment stacks for that matter. And we're looking for larger items to go and tackle. So don't be shy about big problems. If you think we've kind of like given up on it or you don't see hope of us getting to it, please don't be shy about highlighting some of those bigger items. Okay, requested updates. I don't know how many people are aware, maybe with thumbs up or what have you. There's this repo called Azure/resource modules. It is colloquially, oh, I really butchered that, referred to as Carmel, that's the acronym. And they have a very large library of Bicep content. It's basically for all resource types, like kind of best practices rolled in, more defaulted values, that kind of thing. And we are very interested in looking at it as a source for populating the public registry. So some of you eagle-eyed folks noticed that we kind of launched the Bicep registry and then have been pretty quiet about it. We basically got the infrastructure working to be able to publish public content and version it and so on and so forth. But we want to have obviously a rich library of content that is helpful. And this repo, this resource modules repo, has a lot of content in there that we can potentially draw from. So we're trying to figure out how these two things work together. We're trying to figure out what are the quote unquote best practices and what is the best way to write code. And you know, they have different stakeholders than we do. They're targeting a certain type of customer base with some of this content. So this is all saying that there's a lot of discussions happening to kind of figure out what is the right path forward with all this stuff. So we don't know exactly what the future is, but we are working on it. What is the correct place to post issues? Excuse me. Around item potency. I think we owe you a plan on what is a better way to file issues that are specific to a resource provider, that are not necessarily Bicep issues, but are either Swagger issues or item potency issues or otherwise RP API issues. We're going to try to make it easier, one, for you to file it, and two, for us to organize it and process it. So hopefully in the next community call, we'll have some updates on that. And then someone had asked, I don't remember who it was, about Lambda functions. And obviously we talked about it earlier in the call. So we did implement Lambda functions. We are going to get it out in the next release. We think it's pretty cool. And hopefully we'll see you guys do some cool things with it as well. Okay. So no time for, I mean, we'll stay and take questions, but that is all the content, I believe, Stephanie?
Yes, this is all the content. We are on to Q&A. So we are at time. Anyone who would like to leave or anyone who needs to go to another meeting, that's totally fine. But if that's okay, we could also stay for a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions. But yeah, thank you guys all for coming. We really appreciate all of your support, feedback. You are the reason why we do some of these things, all of this, really. Really, really appreciate you. Alex Chrome, you have a question?
Yeah. Last update, you said you were going to have a look at the conditional get secret issue. Have you had a chance to look at that at all?
I feel like we did look at it. Mikolai, do you happen to have the context on that? Or Alex, do you have the issue handy? Did we not add any comments?
Yeah. I basically was, I sorry, well, I didn't have time to work on this basically, but sorry, I'm on a playground. So yeah, but basically it's not that easy as it looks like. It has to do with a kind of extensive change in how we create the output template. Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't look at this, so maybe we need to prioritize it more.
Yeah,
but it's not a straightforward fix, basically.
I just added the triage label to it just so we don't forget about it, and we'll try to at least tell you if we don't foresee us doing it anytime soon.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for the update.
Yep. Any other quick questions we can answer?
Kevin Oliver?
Yeah, just a quick question on the process of new functions getting added into the documentation. So like I was just looking up around the new load JSON content function, but there's nothing in the documentation yet about using it or examples. You know, from that standpoint, as we're like adding in these new Lambda ones as well, how long should it take before that kind of information makes it out into the documentation, or should we be looking for it there now?
Good question. You should be looking for it there. We should do it right away. The process is we generally have waited for someone to say, hey, where is this function? And we say, oh, shit, we should document this function.
So I should be opening an issue out in the
well,
issues list.
Thankfully, Tom's on the call right now, so hopefully we can get it tagged and taken care of quickly.
Fantastic.
I'll make a note. I'm going to
get the thanks. Jonathan is here as well. Those are our two lovely content writers who save our butts all the time.
Yeah, just as we're seeing like maybe those Lambda functions and things coming down to, you know, just to know that, you know, that's part of the process in place, that those get added in maybe as part of the check for the PR, that any documentation gets created that's necessary. I mean, that's probably, don't want to hold up a PR on something like that, but, you know, just so that makes it out there so we can start using those functions and have a good resource for either example or just description of what it can and can't do or what it shouldn't do, you know, any limitations. That's always really nice to have because we want to start using those as soon as they come out, but if we can't find good resources, sometimes it's tough.
Yeah, totally makes
sense. Well, with the load JSON function, basically it was like finished I don't know, a couple of days before we released previous version. So, and it was like a sneak peek, basically just wanted to let it out and see if there are some problems, there are some issues. We found 2 of them. Well, basically you guys found them, so appreciate that. And yeah, we fixed them. They will be released with this version, and it seems that it's the function is now like a bit of more mature, and we can like show it to more public, right? So.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I don't expect those things to be out in documentation like day 0, but just either like if it is a feature to test, I guess maybe I just need to watch the issues more as they come out and have us check and test those things to validate if there's issues. But just was going to try and go use it today versus the load context with JSON, and I couldn't find a way to get it to load properly. So went to the documentation, didn't see it, so thought I'd bring it up while we were on the call.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'll definitely make note of that and talk to the content creators, or sorry, the content people, Jonathan and Tom. Alex, Chrome, your hand's still up. Is there anything else you wanted to?
So no, my apologies. Sorry.
All good, all good. One more, Whit.
I was probably thinking of another one, but yeah, any timeline on being able to pass whole modules and resources into other modules instead of only being limited to parameters?
We are trying to get that done. It is there are some. We were exposed to a gnarly issue after we thought we were done with it, and that's been the issue. And Johnny, one of our newest team members who's on the call right now, is looking into what our options are, and there are expensive but good options or cheap but bad options. So we're going through all that kind of stuff and trying to make the best decision.
Fun.
Yes,
okay.
Always fun.
Cool.
All right, anything else? Sounds good. Thank you guys all for coming, and we'll see you all next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.